We are live
All right.
again. What is this? 5 weeks in a row, right? Are we on five?
Yeah, maybe.
5 or 6, I feel.
It's hard to keep up.
It really is.
Got a lot of stuff going on in
Yeah.
the world and in life, because life is lifing.
Life is definitely lifing.
Life is lifing.
Yeah.
So, my name's Gus, and
I'm Chris. Welcome
welcome
to the podcast.
to the podcast. So, we're just a couple guys that just talking about a bunch of different junk happening in the world, and just trying to give, I guess, our thoughts on what we're experiencing, what we're seeing, and whether or not there's anything. So there's a number of things that I actually had ChatGPT kind of come up with a couple different things that are happening in the world. Obviously, there's a trade policies with 145% tariffs happening with China, which we've been talking about for the last few podcasts, the last two podcasts. I think we actually had we kind of got into those, and what that could potentially mean. There's some outlets saying that it's good, some outlets saying that it's bad. Right now, it's at the moment doesn't seem like it's going great.
No.
So,
Yeah.
but the question is that a short term thing or is that a long term thing? And I don't know that I know enough about. I don't know. I know enough about trade policy deep enough to be able to answer that with any kind of certainty. And honestly, it doesn't seem like people that are in it have any certainty about it either.
Well, I feel that from what I've heard and what I've just been reading is that a majority of economists are, I don't want to use the word oppose, maybe you can say oppose, but have signaled the challenges of imposing tariffs as a tax, right? So it's like I would say that the majority, maybe in the administration or just the people who are doing it, I feel like that could be part of their strategy too. It's just kind of like, we're kind of like just doing this, we'll see what happens. But I do feel like a majority of economists and people who understand how tariffs have played historically are not in favor of the tariffs.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much as individual tariffs, like strategically placed tariffs, but like these broad sweeping tariffs that have a veil of strategy that hasn't really been shared. I don't know. My econ time studying in school has me leaning towards the former.
A concern.
Yeah, I mean, because it really doesn't matter how you play it. It's a domestic tax. It shifts things around in the market and how like the supply and the demand and how the numbers work. Yeah. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to get pushed to the consumer in some way, shape, or fashion.
So what about this idea that Trump made an announcement about anyone making $150,000 or less having effectively a zero tax base? Do you hear about this?
I mean, I think he shared something with me about it a couple of days ago.
Well, he was talking in generalities. I think he made an announcement last week where he specifically identified more details. It was still vague, but sure. He identified that effectively anyone making $150,000 a year would have an effective tax rate of $0. And I guess the case that you could arguably say his administration or people that are just backing the idea of tariffs, the idea is that is going to be designed to offset people who are going to get most impacted by the increase in pricing, right? By removing that tax burden, they now have more money accessible to them to offset the increase in cost, right? The other thing that was interesting is the idea, the difference between, because everyone talks about tariffs being inflationary, which we know that it can be. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is, but it can be. But one of the things that I was listening to another podcast, and they were talking about how the difference between a tariff and inflation is that a tariff will tend to have, because usually tariffs are at least in this case, it seems like the goal is for them to be short-lived, used for negotiation purposes, right? With the threat of them being long-term. So they would have an immediate increase in cost, even though that increase is not because the goods are more expensive to make. It's because that when they come through and get the stamp at the border, the line doesn't say 0%, it says 10% now.
Sure.
So, right. So there's not really an increase in cost of goods. It's a cost of accessing United States markets, right? So the way that they were talking about it is that is a sort of one-time hit, and then after that, assuming that the tariff only happens, let's say 1 year, after that it goes back to, I guess, normal activity, where inflation tends to be annualized. Every year, inflation just kind of persists. So that 10% hit you might get from a tariff on year one, you won't necessarily see that 10% hit on year two, because unless there's an inflationary effect, right? Because the 10% hit is just now the new price. The $100 is now $110, right? This year, if there's no inflation, but there's still tariffs, it's still $110, right? But if inflation hits, right, that $100, removing tariffs from the equation, it's $100 this year, right? And then it's it's $110 for 10% inflation, let's say. Next year, it's $121. It's not $110 again, right? Because it stacks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where tariff is just like a sort of a one-time hit. We got to figure that out. We both keep kicking it.
I keep kicking it. I was like, what? Is that thunder?
Yeah. So, it's a nuance. I don't know. I guess if you look at it over long term, like you're talking about a one-time hit, let's say across 10 years versus inflation over 10 years, that one tariff that happened on year one would not really have a huge impact comparatively over the life of the thing that you're selling, the widget that you're selling, because let's say it happened on year one, but doesn't necessarily happen moving forward, other than the one-time 10%, right?
Yeah.
That you're paying on the thing. It doesn't stack. Where inflation stacks, it's like credit card debt, right? It's like compounding. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, because inflation is a continual measure of the rising or falling prices of goods over a trailing 12 months.
Correct.
So, I mean, I feel like you would still measure the tariff in that. I think it comes down to like to your point, how you measure the tariff, right? So we see the tariff as like, if the tariff ends, I guess it would depend on how.
Even if it stayed on, though, I mean, even if you kept it, if it's a 10% tariff, right, this year, and it's a 10% tariff next year, and the items are still $100, it's still $110. But inflation doesn't work that way. So.
No, but if you increase, so for instance, like, I mean, I just saw a headline, Amazon is in the news now for it because they're talking about breaking out like the price change based off the tariff, right?
Yeah. That's a whole other thing. Yeah.
But I will say that like that ultimately impacts the cost of that good. So like I would still say that tariffs still affect inflation because they're not going to.
They appear like inflation.
Because it's still gonna hit the inflation numbers.
Yes, but the tariff, I guess what they were saying is that a tariff can be inflationary, but isn't necessarily, but will always appear as inflation, whether or not it's inflationary or not. It appears as though it's inflation.
So what do they mean by it appears?
Because the cost of the thing is not, it doesn't cost more to do the thing. Like the reason why inflation actually makes a difference is because it tends to cost more, like everything that went into making this cup went up in cost. So therefore this cup is more expensive, right?
Right. Well, I mean, I would argue that a tariff is a cost.
It's not a cost but it's not a cost of production.
It's not a cost of production, but it's a cost of sale, which ultimately ends. So it's the good is not more expensive, but the cost to sell it. I think that I get what you're saying.
So it's
a different. It's not going to be the same. The cost of the good is the same across all markets, the cost of sales in say Europe is going to be different than the cost of the sale.
Correct.
Here, so yes. It's not a production cost.
Right. It's not a production cost. Anyways, the whole point of bringing that up was just the idea of I had a point to it. I did have a point. I promise you.
That the tariff was not inflationary; it was singular.
Yes, but I had a point to that. I brought that up because we were talking about taxes, right?
Yes.
That the idea. It sounds to me the idea they're trying to push, which I don't know if this actually plays out in the math, but the idea they're trying to push is that okay, there's going to be there are now going to be newer tariffs in place that cup is going to be worth 10% more, for example. But you're also the people who are going to get affected the most are people making less than $150,000 a year. But now they don't have to pay taxes on their income, as an example. So they now have the difference, or even more so theoretically, depending on what their consumption is, to cover the cost of this mug.
And you don't think that would create, honestly, you don't think that would create a situation in where prices now become sticky?
Give me an example of what you mean by that.
So, and we go on a few different, because I've got some thoughts on just the general thing of all of those things. But so let's use 10%, right? Tariffs hit product A, the coffee mug, at 10%. Yeah. So in this simple economy, we're going to assume, we're going to reduce your taxes to below $150,000, because arguably, and I don't think anybody disagrees, is that the middle class, lower class, poor class are the ones who are most affected.
Disproportionately.
Affected. Yeah. So now you've just brought more money into the pockets of the individuals that they're able to spend to compensate for
the mug.
Yeah. Right. So now let's say that the tariff goes away, but now you've created a market where there is a market for the goods at that price, because you've given the households additional money to offset that. And just because that cost isn't there to the business or for the importer, from a business standpoint, I'd be like, well, you know what? If I'm running the business, I'm going to be like, you know what? We now have just realized a 10% savings in our cost of sale.
Mm-hmm.
So before we just nix that off and drop our price, we've kind of set a market, and like there is a market for it at this price. So we're going to test this and keep the prices here, because so long as they're still able to sell the same amount of units at that price, the question would be is like, well, if we dropped it by 10%, are we going to be able to sell X amount more in order to net the same revenue? So I just see that being.
Why would that be a problem?
Because then it doesn't. Then the tariff becomes, to your earlier point, inflationary.
But the person can now afford the cup.
Sure, but now the tariffs have gone away, which, to my understanding, part of.
So this is where the free market. This is where the free market comes into play.
Okay.
Right? So now I'm a producer of widgets. I produce cups, and I know that I don't have to pay the 10% anymore because I get my cups made out from. Let's say we work out a deal with India, which is right now in the works, right?
Okay.
So and the agreement is that everyone else except for where they come from India, it's 10% cheaper for me to make my cups. So as a business owner, you charge the 10% extra, even though you also are getting your cups from India, but there's already a market for the 10% rise. I can also do that, but I'm new. So people don't know my cups the way they know your cups. So what tends to happen is because I'm new, I'm going to go ahead and say, well, I'm going to give you a promotionary price of 10% less. I'm going to give you a discount on the same cup, right? So then hopefully my cups start selling. And then now it's competition. If I start selling enough cups and start taking market share from you, now you're going to be pressured to have to make an adjustment. Unless you and I collaborate, like we would have to get together, which happens.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely happens.
We'd have to get together and be like, hey, I see you're charging the extra 10%. I tell you what, if you can help me to build my business, I won't compete against your price if you will help me to build my business. but you got to help me to build my business. And then I'll sell my cups at the same price that you sell your cups, even though we don't have to pay this 10% tariff.
Yeah, that would be considered collusion.
Correct.
Which would be a problem.
Correct.
Definitely illegal.
Yes.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? Like the market already has mechanisms for that. So like the market, at least the idea of a true free market, which we can argue whether or not we live in one, but the idea of a true free market is that you can totally charge and stay at the 10% extra that you want, even if tariffs get removed. But I can come in and say, I can still make the same money as you per cup by not charging the 10% extra. So I'm going to sell my cup for 10% less, undercut you, so I can start taking market share from you. And then now you have to decide whether or not either you can find a way to make your cup seem more valuable, which is possible through branding and stuff like that. People pay for things with logos on it.
Sure.
Even though they're maybe exactly the same as other things that don't have recognized logos. So that could be a thing that you do, right? Or you're going to have to decide to lower your price. If someone's willing to pay the extra 10% because your brand is such that people are willing to pay extra for the brand, you win. But still, there's still going to be people who are like, I don't care about the brand. I just want the cup and I'll pay the 10% lower price because it's cheaper.
Yeah, but in order to get that, I would still say that, I get it. That makes sense. But it still doesn't address, like, you still put a 10% increase, you baked a 10% increase into the market. Right? So I'm looking like, okay, so, oh, gosh. Thunder and the lightning. So here's a picture that I see, right? So you've got a tariff. Tariff gets implemented. We're going to call it 10% on the widget.
Yeah.
Increases the price of the widget by 10%.
Okay.
The current proposal, it's not even an official proposal. I'm just going to use that word because my brain is limited right now. Out there is that, hey, we are going to help offset that for the middle class and the lower income. We're going to offset that by you paying zero taxes.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's going to be offset with the tariff money that we're bringing in. So it's like,
that's the idea.
That's the idea. So if that's the strategy now and the assumption, then we can assume that the tariff strategy is no longer a short-term strategy. It is a strategy in which they see tariffs staying in order to compensate for that loss of tax, tax base, and or they drop the tariffs and then they still they're not going, and then the income $0 income stays the same on these households, and now with a loss of revenue, we're going to try and trim out the budget to prevent the deficit.
I'm sorry. Well, you say a loss. I'm sorry. I lost you at a loss of revenue. Where's the loss of revenue coming from?
The loss of revenue would come from if you effectively make people or have people who earn less than $150,000 pay zero taxes.
Okay.
And if the position is that we can do that because it's being offset by the tax revenue that's generated from the tariffs in some capacity, that makes sense. But that would lead me to infer that the tariff strategy then is not a short-term strategy.
So I'm sorry.
It is a strategy to stay.
So for clarity's sake, I don't think that, and I misspoke. The tariff strategy as it was initially implemented seems like the short-term strategy, which was everyone gets. And then there's this 145 on China and this 25 on Mexico. And like, I think those excesses were the short-term strategy. It sounds to me like there's going to be a standard reciprocal tariff strategy that will be long-term, but those are going to be much smaller. So that's where the 10% idea comes into the fray, right? Unless there's some other arrangement made between some other trade arrangement made between multiple countries. So it does sound like there is a long-term tariff element in there, which, I mean, it's not that tariffs have never existed. So, we've had tariffs. Other countries use tariffs, regularly. The question is to what degree and what access do each of the countries that are working adjacent to each other have access to the other
Mm-hmm.
in terms of their court systems, in terms of their access to consumers, in terms of the ability to export and import and all that good stuff. And I think the challenge that it sounds like the challenge, and most of it seems to be coming, the challenge seems to be with regard to China, is that they subsidize their manufacturing, making it near impossible to compete, right, fairly. And then, which is honestly, that's their country. They can kind of do what they want. There's not really anything we can do about that. But the other problem is man, I can't think of, my brain is not working. Intellectual rights, right? And intellectual property rights is the other challenge, where they effectively copy and paste all of our stuff and then resell it, under the radar as Nike or as whatever the brand is, but it's a knockoff. It's not Nike's. It's not.
Yeah.
Right. It's not there, or they make a competing product that's exactly the same, in using technologies that are essentially trademarked and patented here in the United States, but they don't respect any of those patents or trademarks in China, right? So, and then there's no court system over there for us to be even able to challenge that. They don't give us access to that. But the Chinese have access to our court system. So if we did the same thing, they would be able to come, and they've done that. They'll come to us, and then they'll sue our country. Yeah. So they'll sue our country, right, for taking their technologies. So they can take ours, but we can't take theirs.
Oh, because our system will.
Yeah,
we'll let them have their time in court.
Correct.
And
we give them access to that. They have access, even though they're foreign, right? That they have access to our court system, because our court system is supposed to be designed for like fairness for all as best as possible, where their court system is completely closed. We have no access to their court system. So, those are some of the things that, I think are more short-term strategic, because it's not that we don't want to work with China. We need them to be a little bit more reasonable in how they behave as trade partners, because that's the problem. They don't really behave fairly as trade partners. They behave only in their best interest, and they don't do anything to work for mutual interests, which is, I think, the biggest challenge that we're running into with China. The other nations, I don't think there's not really a big issue with the other nations. Most of the other nations they seem to be having conversations with us as it relates to, trade and whatnot. And there may be disagreements on what that ultimately is going to look like. But I think, the biggest challenge that we have right now is just with figuring out China. Now, that's getting into it. I'm sorry, I'm kind of going off into a tangent. Getting back to the long-term strategy of tariffs, I do think there's going to be a long-term strategy of tariffs, but I think that long-term strategy is going to be substantially more mild than what we've been seeing, right? It's really just to kind of set, how much do we need to bring in from tariffs to offset the cost of goods coming in due to tariffs, as it relates to people making. Well, I think it's not people making under 150. I think it's the first 150,000 is not taxable, and then anything above that becomes taxable. I think that's how they're doing it. It's my understanding.
Okay.
At least that's the thought process, right? So if you make 150, if you make 200,000, then you get taxed on 50,000. That makes sense. So anything above that $150,000 mark, then taxes kick into gear. Now, I don't know what kind of markers they're going to be doing, what kind of brackets they're thinking about, anything like that. But I think that's my understanding of how they're going to handle, at least the theory of how they're going to handle taxes for that. But I mean, again, the $100 widget, the $100 mug that I buy today,
it's an expensive mug.
Yeah. So next year, when I buy the same mug, because of tariffs, it's $110, right? Removing inflation, if it's just $110 due to tariffs, right? Then the next year after that, it's still $110, right? So it's not like it's continuing to go up in price year over year, unless there is a market increase in the value of the mug, right? and the market determines that this mug is worth $110 base value, and that there is now 100, you put another 10% on top of that, which it could happen.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the mug has a nice brand on it and people are willing to pay more than the $100, right?
Yeah.
And the $10 tariff, they're willing to pay the $110 and then pay the $11 tariff now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are some market dynamics that are going to be at play here that I think the trick is just my concern is we don't live in a truly free market is my concern. Like, we live in this illusion of choice where all of the corporations are essentially owned by a conglomerate of some type, right? So
yeah, sure. I mean, there's like an oligarchy of private corporations.
Correct.
Just, if you will, for definitions, but I feel like people would just understand, like, well, I don't think a whole lot of people know what a true oligarchy is, but I think that's what it is. We're just on the private side of things.
It's like a mafia of businesses.
Yeah,
basically.
like, what is it? If you saw the umbrella of Procter and Gamble, what is even? Have you ever seen that? Have you ever seen the thing of Disney?
Oh yeah,
with like the Disney ears and then all of its affiliates and like all of this stuff. And I use the airline. I use the airline industry as an example too. They say, oh, there's a lot of competition in the airline industry, and you've got choices. And if you like take a macro look, like, there is a lot of competition in the industry. But when you go like micro down, you've got United Airlines predominantly crushes the Miami International Airport,
mm-hmm.
and you've got Delta, who controls Atlanta,
mm-hmm.
few and far, and then like JetBlue is up in New York. So it's like, yes and no, there is and isn't competition, because you could argue competition macro, but we don't live in the macro economy.
No,
we live in a micro, our local micro economy.
We have the options that are in front of us.
Yeah, like, who cares if I can catch a flight with United cheaper from Miami to Houston, if I have to fly from Orlando to Houston, but I don't have the option of flying United because I'm not drive. You know what I'm
not going to drive 4 hours.
And it's not that they don't fly out of it, but just predominantly like just the way that the hub and spoke system, and that's just used for an example purpose.
Yeah.
But I think that is also so it can be looked at across a bunch of different industries. And meanwhile, there's average Americans, we're arguing over fair competition and choice and all these products. Well, you don't look at like, okay, well, but it's all a roll up. You're competing under the same. It's an illusion of competition.
Yeah, it's an illusion of
because it's all rolling up to the same place.
Correct.
And where the power and the money and all of that stuff.
They're all the same person.
All the same person.
Yeah, just they're wearing different hats. Like they all have different suits on.
Like, I think the eyewear company that produces eyeglass frames, I think there's 2 companies.
Oh wow.
I think there's only 2 companies that do that. Well, and then there's not Wayfair. What's the there's this other company that just came out. It starts with a W. I can't remember what it's called, but they offer like very like, they're not cheap. There's like $100 frames, like nice frames, like not name brand frames, but like even the name brand frames, there's like only like 2, I believe, places that produce the frames.
Yeah.
So it's like there is no real.
And you see that in food and everything. Like for like General Mills, for example.
Yeah.
Like that they make their own generic version.
Yes.
Like the generic version you buy for like half price. Like that's General Mills.
It is. And it's purposely made not as good.
The loopy fruits, right? Yeah. The loopy fruits are made from General Mills, just like the Fruit Loops are. I don't know if Fruit Loops is General Mills. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I remember when they came out with these big bags.
Yeah.
You're like, wow.
Yeah, this is great.
It's so great.
And they go stale like super fast.
So fast. Yeah. So, right. So I think that's interesting. You bring that up. So it's like, it's this illusion. So it's like, all right. So, right. Because this is how the higher ups got to be thinking.
Yeah.
We're just getting so tangential and I love it. It's just like, all right. So we're going to have a box of Frosted Flakes here.
Yeah.
Not the family. The family size is like $8.
Yeah.
It's wild, right? And you can get this big bag that's twice as big.
Right. Like $6
for $10.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, or like $10, or call it pretty much the same price.
Yeah.
But the lifespan of that,
they don't have all the preservatives in that one.
Is half. So arguably, it could be better
it might be
you.
Healthier, right? You just got to eat all that bag, and like you got 2 weeks to eat it.
Yes, I could eat this whole bag and be just as healthy as you eating this.
Well, I don't know about just as healthy.
Yeah,
you'll end it with diabetes for sure.
But I find it interesting because it's like, okay, so it's like, unless you've got a big family, right, and you can warrant eating at that pace, you actually just have traded paying for a product at price and consuming that product versus paying for more of a product and then at a better unit price and throwing half of it away. It reminds me of this story, and it had to do kind of like with it also in a little pay disparity. And it was like this general part of the story was like, this guy was working and he worked in the fields, and he got this pair of boots that was like, it was like $10 for this pair of boots because he couldn't afford anymore. He couldn't afford more expensive boots. Mm-hmm. And these boots would last him like 3 months. Mm. Right. And then he's got the other worker who's like, why are you buying those boots? He's like, you should buy these boots. And these boots are, I don't know, call it $35, right? Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, I can't afford the $35 boots. That's why I'm buying the $10 boots. It's like, yeah, but these boots will last you 18 months. Mm. And it's like, yeah, but I can't. So it's ironic because like you have these people who can't afford
the more expensive,
higher quality that actually will save them money in the long term. Right. So over 18 months, this person is spending $35 versus spending like $60, having to re-up a lower quality boot. And it's just, I think that story kind of lives, my own version, because it's not exactly how the story was told. I think I got the message across, but it definitely lives like rent free in my head. I mean, it impacts how I make my purchases.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with like, we have a culture of consumerism. Like that's sort of the I would say the corporate machine has done a great job at making us highly consumer based, where we are more likely to replace a thing than we are to fix a thing, right?
I would also argue that that's also because the way that they have done it to their credit was pretty genius, is that they've made it to where repairing stuff is almost like, it makes you like, is it really worth repairing it? Well, because it's so expensive to repair it.
But I think it depends on the thing that you're doing. So like, for example, I was talking to someone about, he gets his shoes made. Mm-hmm. Right, and then he resoles them, and he's like, "They're super expensive."
Yeah, you can resole a shoe. Yeah,
mm-hmm. And I was asking, I was like, like what's the advantage to that? He's like, well, what he likes about it is that the shoe, because it's a leather shoe, and with leather, the top shapes.
Yep, it stretches to your
foot. So mm-hmm. it eventually just kind of fits perfectly, mm-hmm. right? And what he was talking about was this idea that he used to buy the cheaper shoes, and the problem was as soon as they actually started fitting, even if they were leather, that the soles would wear out, and those shoes, you can't really replace the soles. They're not really
because they're not designed to do that,
right? So they're not really designed for that. So he'd just go and buy another pair of shoes. But he said he's had these shoes for like decades, because all he does is he just resoles them, mm-hmm. and they have a perfect fit every time.
Yeah,
and the cost over the lifetime of the shoe is substantially less than him buying the new shoe every year or every 18 months or 2 years, because the soles have worn out. So, it goes back to quality. Like if you're making something, that shoe was built to be updated and repaired.
Yeah.
As opposed to it's built to be thrown away. Most of the stuff that's made today is built for obsolescence.
Yeah.
Obsolescence.
Coffee Mate. Did you ever hear the story of Coffee Mate?
No.
It was like 10 years ago. And then, people can fact check me. But the story that I heard is a Coffee Mate. Like if you had an old coffee, it's Coffee Mate, right?
It sounds right.
Yeah. the old coffee makers used to last like forever.
Okay.
Right. And the thing that would break most frequently was like the heating plate. And you could like replace that heating plate. Well, now coffee makes it, and this was like, I was kind of like in college now too. So this is just like 15 years ago. So I'd have to do some additional research. But from what I recall is that like, so Coffee Mate changed that and they put the heating plate in this thing.
So it's hard to get access to.
So you can't replace it.
Oh.
So when it breaks,
you got to buy the whole thing.
You've got to buy the whole thing again. And I think it's interesting because I also feel like, that, people put warranties. So whenever somebody offers me a warranty for this year, for how long, in my mind, the way I read that is that's the expected useful life of that.
Yes.
Of that item, whatever you're going to warranty me, or that's how long you expect me to not have any problems with it, because you're going to warranty me up to that point.
Yeah. After that, you don't want to have to pay for it.
Yeah. And then, some of the things that you got to do, like, I think the shoes is a great example of something that you could easily kind of like redo, but like, I don't know, you get stuff to like have to repair, take in, like, it's like such a pain to do. Like you've got to like fill out a paper form, and then you've got to do this, and then you got to get your own box, and you've got to pay for the shipping. And it's like, but it's your product that broke.
Right.
And then you've got to wait, and then you've got the inconvenience of not having it for.
Well, they do that on purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all built-in strategy for you to say, that's not worth my time. It's easier for me to go to Target, pick it up off the shelf, and then pay for it again.
They build all of these like doors you got to walk through, walls you got to like deal with, because they want you to be like so frustrated, like, oh, the hell with this. Someone just buy a new one.
Absolutely.
So
they're all built-in tactics.
Oh, for sure.
It's by design.
Yeah.
It's absolutely.
So and we as Americans, I think I think that corporations were able to do that because historically we've been such a strong economic power that we have had the luxury of to be able to just throw stuff to the side and get a new whatever the widget is. You know what I'm saying? You go to these other countries and they don't do that. Like they drive their cars to the ground. Yeah,
it was like my uncle. My uncle would not get a new car. He told me this. I remember years ago. He's like, "No, I'm going to drive this until it breaks down on the side of the road."
Yeah,
and
that's what happened.
Yeah. He finally got a new car. But he's like, "Yeah, no, broke down on the side of the turnpike."
Yeah,
and I don't know what happened. I don't know if he just left it there. I don't know if he took his tag, just left it there, or if he got it taken.
He's like, "Peace out, I'm out."
I don't know. I actually don't know what he did with it, but it was like, I'm like, that is just, that's just hilarious.
Yeah.
So like, but yeah,
probably more expensive to get it towed.
What I think is crazy, like, I don't know, iPhones are a prime example, or any type of smartphone. They've got you on this cycle of a new one coming out every year, and you don't need a new phone every year. Mine is 3 years old. It'll be 4. I think it'll be 1, 2. I think it's 3. So when the new one comes out in September, it'll be 4 generations old, and I'm perfectly content with that phone. The only reason why I am now interested in upgrading it is because there's AI features that had I bought not that model's phone, but the one right after it, I could have rode this, but like I don't have those features. Yeah. So like that is like, okay, is that worth it to me? But it's a reason to like upgrade.
Sure. And you've made good use of it over time.
Yeah, but it's like, and he's interested, like, well, how are we going to keep selling units?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's hard to keep selling a $1,200 product to the same consumer year after year after year. But what if we bundled it up with the communication services?
Sure.
And instead of offering contracts, we put them in a non-contracted service that just has them contracted through the payment plan of the phone, so that you can always re-upgrade your phone every year and have the newest phone, and it only costs you $50 a month.
Right.
And that's what that's the
but
contract.
Then they resell
that phone.
That phone.
Or they refurbish it for you. I might have my first phone. They might have refurbished my phone and then given it back to me. So, but it's very interesting. Like, I mean, I wouldn't say that it changes like my purchasing habits any more or less, but I definitely just like find myself keenly aware of like, I mean, I just think about these things where it's like, it's just, I feel like it's the rat race. It's just another type of like rat race. They've got us on a hamster wheel. And I remember like 5 years ago, I think it was like 5 years ago when I was having the conversation with people. I'm like, look, I was like, we're going to end up turning into a subscription economy.
Yeah.
And like, look where we're at
They're
now.
starting
like,
to get there. Yeah.
There's so many. There is a subscription to get rid of your unused subscriptions.
Yeah.
Talk about inception.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally,
You need the devil to get rid of the devil.
Right.
So, and it's just like, it is very interesting.
Yeah.
And to your point, we were the U.S. household was very strong from the amount of money it was making relative to the cost of living and relative to the cost of consumer expenses.
Yeah.
And we kind of just rode into that consumerism.
Yeah. Didn't pay attention.
Supported by the push of the companies and
Yeah.
corporations moving us in that direction, and not necessarily paying attention to how those expenses were going to create issues long term, because nobody was really paying attention to wages. And I was having a conversation too about like, so somebody I know is a manager and manages 3 people on their team. And they were doing something internally for something, having to approve some pay or something for the team, but then found out that the person that they manage is making $2,000 more or $2,000 less than what this other person is making, managing this person and having a whole bunch of other different responsibilities.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. So the conversations they're going after, like, working on getting, reevaluation of the value. But it's like the conversation we were having was like, well, you're not supposed to know other people's wages. You're not supposed to like talk about that. And I've had this position for so long. It's like, I think they say that it's unprofessional to do that. I think that that's one of those things that they just sold us
so that we're not
to create a lack of transparency in the free market of labor.
Right.
There's no reason why I shouldn't, like, and they have to dance around that because they can't do it. Like, if it were, I don't know, I'm just so far out of corporate America, because my conversation would be like, hey, look, we're going to agree on my value. You know that I perform even at a higher level than expectation.
So the challenge with that is that not everyone has the ability to negotiate that way.
Right. But what I'm saying is just that I think that but the tabooness of not being able to use that to your advantage.
I would agree.
You know what I'm saying? Because if it were me, I'd be like, look, this person I'm managing is making $2,000 less than me. So one of two things are happening. It's either they're overpaid and I'm underpaid, or they're overpaid and I'm paid at market value, just not at your market value, because my pay is relative. Like, I'm not making just $2,000 more than somebody when I have all of the additional.
Right. I'm also supervising this person.
Yeah. And I think that just by when that transparency happens, and then that dialogue, and it comes back to consumer households too, because some of us, we just don't want other people knowing our finances. We're like embarrassed about that, or do we just want to keep it close to heart? And I think that's fine. But I think that it also does. I think that created a lot of issues with wage gains and labor gains and all this. I mean, we had some different changing markets and stuff like that, with just like the millennials coming into the marketplace and everything. But
I mean, I would say to be fair, and I want to try to be as fair on this on this topic as possible. To be fair, not everyone is worth the same. So even though they do the same job, right? Like, you could make a case to say, oh, well, they're both doing the same job, so they should get paid the same. But they may not bring the same value.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Right. You may have somebody who's like really amazing at this job and they do this job fantastic. And as an employer, I would want to incentivize them. Like, I want to keep this person. This person's great. This person is good. They're okay. They're getting the job done, but they're not nearly as good as this person. So I would be okay to pay this person more money. Now, if they knew each other,
we're talking about people in the same role.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now let's say they knew each other's salaries. This person is now going to be disgruntled because he's like, well, John over here is getting paid $10,000 more than I am. Right. Mm-hmm. So I want to get paid that same $10,000. You see what I'm saying?
But then that allows for the conversation on what needs to happen. Mm. Right. So, I mean, I think that there's differences, like, I guess plateaus, or like, so if you've got this position and it's underneath this position, there should be a
range.
Yeah. Like, if I'm managing you, there's a premium to me managing
for sure.
you. And whether or not that's the premium for the highest person on my team, right? If maybe you're so much more valuable than the other two because you kind of pick up, or you're working on a larger account, you pick up more stuff, you have more broader responsibilities. So you're not paid the average X figure, you're paid $5,000 more than that X figure. But now you're just like, if there's a $10,000 premium typically in the market between these two levels, and now you're at $4,000 before me. I mean, I feel like arguably it would be like, okay, well, then the person who's doing it, like, they're still like, I feel like that's where you're like deteriorating into the value of because, like, you may, to your point, if George, who's not here, but we're going to pretend he's here, says, oh, well, Gus is making $10,000 more than I am, and now I want to make that, the conversation is like, okay, well, here's the things that are missing or that's happening to where we can warrant and justify that pay difference, where it's like, okay, it's like, well, now if we know, if there's the change, it's like, okay, well, I'm only making $4,000 more than you, but I've got my own work to do, and then I've got to manage you, and I've got to manage George, who's all now disgruntled,
right.
And then I got to manage, Amanda here. So I'm managing 3 different people, and if anything happens, like, that falls on me.
Yeah, you got to solve that problem.
You've got to solve that problem, yeah. Or it could be my head that rolls, right? So the saying goes. So it's kind of like, it would come with its challenges, right? But I think that it would be more advantageous to the labor market and to the workers, and would put more transparency and onus on the employers to justify the wages, employ correctly, and also provide a great way to retain employees.
Yeah.
Right?
That's fair.
You know what I mean? Because it's like, oh, well, George, who's not here. I mean, if you're disgruntled and you're not willing...
How would you handle, let's say someone doesn't want other people to know what they're making. How would you handle that? Because there's going to be people that, like, they just don't want others to know.
I mean, I think that just comes to, like company, it would be company, I guess it would fall down to company policy, or if it was something that actually got legislated, and there was, like, if it was, like, considered public information within the company, like, or just kind of like based on free market, like.
And would you say that everyone's salary would be exposed, from the CEO all the way down to the janitor?
I mean, I think at surface level, I don't think that would be bad, right? Or maybe it's not maybe to protect people's anonymity.
Words.
Just for purpose of the discussion, maybe it's an average of the people who are on that team, or an average of the people who are in that, like,
or a range or something.
Or a range, a range of where it's happening. It's like, hey, on this team, the range of salaries is from here to here. Nobody knows what that, like, is, who's. But then it's like, oh shit, like, oh, I'm on this, and
there's an opportunity.
I'm making $100,000, but the range for my position is 120. So
how do I get there?
How do I get there?
Yeah.
Right. And it prompts conversations, which I think would allow, in my mind at least, it would allow employees to be more bought into their own success. Sure. They have a specific goal that they're chasing. And then there's expectations that have been set, both from the company and the manager standpoint, and the employees.
And then they can say, well, if you do this, this, and this, then we could justify that, right? Because these items over here that you do, if you add this, if you start doing these things. Because then the employer also, that's interesting, because now the employer can also translate that to dollars.
And right? I think it would create more efficiencies too, because then you start having people wanting to get promoted, not necessarily throughout positions, but in their salary, and they're willing to take on maybe more responsibility or take a stronger focus on their own responsibility, which creates efficiencies. And they may end up being able to lose some jobs or some roles or consolidate, which would have negative impacts for some people who hold those jobs. Right. But if everybody's wages are going up, and I mean like wages, like kind of like across the board, right? Where it's not just as like, hey, John's making $100,000 and there's only two of us in the company and you're making 30. Hey, our average salary is 75K. So we're doing well. Right. But I just think that it would give more power. I don't even want to say power. I just think that it would be good because we're talking about a free market economy. Yeah. And free market economy requires a free flow of information.
That's fair.
Right?
Yeah.
So, to your point, we're not in a free market economy. And I also think that a lot of people don't necessarily understand truly what a free market economy is. I think that they think that we're in a free market economy.
Right.
And for purposes of, kind of what we have, I guess, been defining socially as a free market. Well, we are in a free market economy, but like free market economy means a free flow of information. It means no tariffs, no trade barriers.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know.
Adam Smith, we had this conversation before. Is it Adam Smith?
Well, I don't know if it means necessarily no tariffs. And I don't know that it means no trade barriers. I mean, I think a free market economy would be freedom to conduct commerce. In my view, it would be freedom to conduct commerce in a way that's fair for all players across the board. So let's say Canada and the United States are working across with each other. There may still be some tariffs that are put in place, but maybe they're reciprocal, right? And the access to the markets are open. So we can still have our businesses in Canada without a problem. They can have their businesses in ours without a problem. If they, and again, the tariff typically is related to where is the widget made. So if the widget is made in the United States, then that tariff doesn't apply. That's the idea. Mm-hmm. So the same thing might happen in Canada. Well, if you make your widget in Canada, then Canada doesn't charge you a tariff, right? Because the idea behind, in this case, what the idea is that, well, we want to try to the country is trying to do what it can to try to protect jobs here. Mm-hmm. So if you can figure out a way to create jobs here where you can pay Americans and it's still profitable for you, even with the 10%, without the 10% tariff, great. But you might find that, for example, I don't think we're going to ever get like T-shirts manufactured in the United States at any compared to where we can get T-shirts manufactured everywhere else, right? Like it's going to be very difficult because the 10% tariff on a T-shirt is so nominal because the shirt is already relatively inexpensive. Mm-hmm. And to get American workers to make T-shirts is probably going to be way too expensive compared to where we can get them made in Vietnam, mm-hmm. Mexico, or these other places where their cost of living is just so much lower. So it's a very low priced item. It's such a low priced item that's so relatively easy to make. It would be very difficult for us to compete, right? For them to go to Mexico and say, Mexico, why don't you have your shirts built in the United States? And then they look at what they got to pay Americans and be like, nah, we'll pay the 10%. We'll pay the 10% tariff. It'll be cheaper for us.
And there's less capital investment.
Significantly less. So, I think there are going to be certainly those things. I think that I don't think tariffs and completely open trade is necessarily equivalent to a free market. I think
based on Adam Smith, I think it's based on his definition mm-hmm. of a free market, that is what a free market is, mm-hmm. where supply and demand dictates mm-hmm. where the business is done. I think the tariffs can be an important tool for, right? Because what that doesn't take into account, I guess you could say, is that the free market based on that, where supply and demand, in the invisible hand mm-hmm. move stuff, doesn't take into account like copyrights and privileges and things like that.
Well, right? Also cost of living, like the cost of living comparatively, $1 mm-hmm. goes substantially farther in Mexico than it does in the United States. Mm-hmm. So like a free, open trade between Mexico and the United States is probably going to lean favorably for Mexico as a manufacturer, for example. But if we manufacture stuff and try to sell it in Mexico, that'll probably be really difficult for us to do.
Right.
Because Mexico, like our dollar is so strong compared to the peso.
Okay.
Right. So we don't have the ability to trade as easily into Mexico as they have to trade into us.
With that specific thing, though.
What do you mean?
Well, in this case, it would be shirts. So there would be things that like we can't create or build. Like one of them was used as and I don't think Mexico has it, but like mangoes, right? We can't make mangoes here. Like, or maybe there's very few temperate areas in the United States that can create mangoes. So we have to import mangoes. So
that's fair.
Like, So
but like look at cars. Like you can make cars in Mexico, you can make cars in the United States. It's way cheaper to make cars in Mexico.
Right.
So like we can't export our cars to Mexico in a way that is able to compete with Mexican cars. But they can They can if they were building, damn it. They can build their cars over there and they can sell them here, and even with a 10% tariff, like they could probably still be competitive. They may even be able to be better than competitive just because of the cost of labor over there compared to the cost of labor over here. So
see, but then that goes back to the point. So it's like, yes, so then they have the benefit of being able to manufacture over there, but then it becomes the onus comes on the laborers there and increasing their wages. Right. So it's like, but the free market will end up, and it's not perfect, right? The free market is not perfect, which is why I am not a proponent for a complete free market.
Yeah.
I think in theory, like textbook study, it's great, and it should be used as the foundation to build an economy off of.
Yeah.
But I definitely am not in favor of a 100% free market.
Yeah, you need some guardrails. Yeah.
Yeah, because I go back to this whole thing where everybody's so worried about like the government getting so much power, right? Which is kind of like where we have like our regulations and we have these different things. Well, I take that and say the same thing with the private market. Like that's why you can't have a complete free market, because there comes a tipping point, right? Where like if a small group of people, which there already are, or a person has so much of influence in the power, it's just going to continue to snowball. So now you're going to have...
Well, that's why there's like monopoly rules that the government instills,
but the monopoly... So I was listening to something the other day. The monopoly rule is... It's interesting because it had to do with... What was it? Mark Zuckerberg? Was he like he was in Congress or was...
because of that Instagram?
Because the Instagram thing, right? So it was interesting because was it the SEC or whoever, Fair Trade Commission? So they approved that merger back then, right? Which is where the challenge is if they're going to try and unravel it. But they approved that because the FTC, like the definition of what is considered a monopoly had to do more specifically with prices, with how this would affect consumer prices. Right.
And because they were free,
there was it didn't violate any monopolistic rules, and they weren't looking. So now, whether or not they're not that they're backtracking, but like based, I guess, on this new idea of the currency of information and the power that can wield. Now they're trying to like break it up or kind of like that. But I think that's interesting because like, yes, we have monopoly rules, but that opens up a whole nother conversation of how the rules that we have to protect consumers, or just in general, probably if you just kind of comb through them, they don't get updated enough, or they're not forward paced enough to where we're moving. And
because of the way the technology is moving
and how fast it's moving, and the fact that, it doesn't matter if you had everybody on one party, other party in Congress or whatever. It's the fact that you're dealing with 435 different people who represent a larger body constituency, and then got to get it passed through another chamber of 100 people, and then get it signed off by one person. Just the nature of that is going to take
and
a long time.
There's all kinds of private interests and corporate interests that's all mixed into that sways all that stuff.
But let's just say that the private, I'm just saying, just from the standpoint of how many human bodies
of it,
are in there having to come to a consensus to make a decision, just creates a large ship that's not easily turnable.
But that's for me, that is a feature, right, of of the different variations on democracies, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a feature that our ship doesn't turn so fast versus a detriment. A lot of people see that as a detriment. I think that's a feature.
I don't think that it's a, I don't think it's a detriment. I think that it's not something that is like spoken about, like to where it's just like people are thinking of that. Like whenever you're making this, it's like, okay, so like we just have, it's a feature of our democracy, but like I don't think that people think of it as a challenge. I would say it's not a detriment, but I would say it is a challenge.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Because I mean, the thing is that people are hurting now.
Yes.
Right. And they're like, we need things to change. And then like this ship is like, okay, we're gonna turn the ship around, and it's like,
yeah. Like it's like that iceberg in front of the
Titanic. Yeah, it's like it's taking forever to move, right? So that is the that's one of the challenges of democracy. But at the same time, you don't want a governance that can just like on a whim just completely change direction and go.
You don't want the whiplash effect. Yeah. Because you have the whiplash effect, and that's, in my opinion, arguably more detrimental than a slow.
Yeah, and it's scary. I mean, look at everything that, like, what the Trump administration is doing, without getting into because I know we're going to have to wrap this up, but, like, even what he's doing is already, like, way further than anyone's, like, comfortable with. And he still has to go through a bunch of different processes. There's some executive orders that he can expedite on and stuff like that. Yeah. But, like, that's not changing, like, major functions in the government in terms of like how the government operates per se. Like he is making some sweeping changes in terms of like maybe certain departments and stuff like that, but it's still there's still a sort of a process that everybody has to go through in order for all this stuff to stick. And even if it were to stick, it's like anything that's executive orders can be reversed on the immediate entrance of the next president. So, like the system that we have in place, the fact that it does take such a long time to kind of turn the wheel, and even if there are some slight jarring, like there are I think the good part of us being sort of this big slow moving ship is that like it takes a long time not only for good things to happen, but for bad things to manifest as well. Right. So,
yeah, but then we're so slow that by the time they start manifesting, it takes such a long time to.
Well, no, you can. The thing is that you can see those things coming, right? Like most of the time, you can see those things coming, and like yes, there's pain in the short term. When you look at the big scope of like things happen in like 10-year cycles, right? So like in the scope of things, like even 2008 was awful for everyone who lived through that for the first 5 years at least, right? But then after that, like things got better. Yeah. And they got a lot better. You know what I mean? So now we're kind of going through like, and we just got out of that sort of high, and now we're kind of in this sort of weird rut right now. But I mean, one could argue that something of that nature that was so detrimental to an economy could have like undercut the entire economy and really made the United States a bad place today. And that's not where we're at. We're in a weird place right now, but we just got off of a really high, economy was great at one point. The housing market was great at one point. Commercial market was great at one point. Like everything was great. And now we're starting to kind of go over that hill and starting to feel a little more pain again. And we can argue about what the reasons are, whether that's COVID or the administration's decisions or Biden's decisions or whatever. But those are cycles that are normal in an economy like ours, as far as that we've seen historically. Yeah. And the fact that we move slowly is one of the reasons why we're able to kind of bounce back so well, typically whenever there's challenges, because we've had challenges. We've had serious economic challenges historically, but we've also bounced back really well. Yeah. I mean, if you think about the Great Depression, terrible time, terrible, awful time. But then that led into like one of the most fruitful, like, economies that the United States has ever seen.
Yeah, and that was on the back of World War I. So I would say that it's not because of the market cycle that got us out. It was the fact that it's up for debate if we got into it purposefully or not. But it was World War I that drove the industries that got us out of the Great Depression.
So yeah, that's certainly debatable. I think that World War I was
I think there was tariffs at that time too.
Yeah, I think World War I was definitely a added fuel to what was already moving in a direction that was favorable. So I wouldn't necessarily debate that World War I was not a major factor, but I think that the economy was already moving in a positive direction.
It expedited the recovery.
Yes.
It expedited the recovery
Without a doubt,
for sure.
I would not debate that at all. So I know you got a hard.
Yeah.
You got a hard stop.
I got a hard stop.
So I think, are you okay to just kind of chill? Is there anything else you want to? Okay, so let's make this a hard stop. We'll get into what like World War I's always an interesting. The World War I and II are always interesting topics of conversation, which we can certainly get into, and what was like, I guess what happened then and what we learned. What did we learn from those things? Mostly nothing.
Well, a lot of nothing. We need more history, maybe.
So, but anyways, I thought that today's conversation was really good. I really like the fact that we're talking about free markets and stuff like that. I do feel like we do need to have more transparency in both corporate, where corporate interest lies in governance, and corporations in general. The just sort of more transparency with how people get paid, what people get paid, and I do feel like that. I agree with you. I think that would definitely have a positive impact in the workforce, because then people will have a better understanding of where their value is, because then you have something to compare to, right? Yes. Especially if you're looking at, if you know that, for example, another company is paying this type of role this much money, then you like, oh, well, I want to understand, how can I get to this salary that they're paying? And now it may be that the other company is just a bigger company, they can afford to pay more. Sure. Right? So then, but
then it puts good pressure
on the smaller company.
The smaller company. Yeah. That's what we call competition,
right? Exactly. So now they're competing for the best people to work in the role. So then what does that company do to hold on to that person? Maybe they give some other benefits. Yeah. Like, hey, we'll give you more vacation time. We'll let you work from home. We'll give you more flexibility with the time that you work or whatever. So that maybe I'm not getting paid as much, but because I can work from home, I save on my gas. I don't have to spend an hour driving. There's all kinds of other incentives for me to stay with this company, even though it gets paid less. I don't have to worry about the structure of that, because if I worked over here, I'd have to show up at work every day, 9 to 5, no exceptions. My vacation is this, my benefits are that, and that's the end of it. Where this one may be a little more flexibility. My benefits are not necessarily as good, but that flexibility allows me to spend more time with my family or my kids or whatever the case, and that may have more value to me. So I think that those things are good. So I have to agree with you on your position on that.
Yeah, I don't know how the information like that should be delivered or would be delivered.
Yeah.
I just, again, know that I just feel that the transparency around that would be
beneficial.
Yeah. I would say beneficial to the consumer or to the laborer, because that in and of itself would create more operational efficiencies in the labor force within the company.
Which is arguably beneficial to the company.
Very beneficial, because then they can have more of the conversation on whether or not we're going to pass the savings on to the consumer, or if we're going to take it and keep it in its profit. And then the consumer is going to earn more, which is going to allow them to be able to weather higher prices should they do that. Like, it's just.
Well, they also have like a better incentive to get better talent, and then it drives them to also find ways to keep talent, so that talent doesn't become a commodity. Because that's what we've been seeing as of late, right? Is that talent is now a commodity. Oh, well, if you're not willing to do it, I'll find someone else who is. Right?
For less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So when the other person knows what the pay is, you're not going to find them for less. So you're going to have to figure out, either I really like you and I want to make this work, or I'm going to decide to work with someone else because I know I'm going to pay the same, but I feel like the other person maybe bring more to the table than you can. So then it's going to put pressure on the employee too, because now that also requires you to identify, like, maybe I should learn a more skill set, be better at this.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I mean, to play devil's advocate to my own position, I love doing this, is that I guess one could also argue that the labor market in general is the free hand of the free market, meaning that you could argue that it's like, oh, well, you may say that this company is paying this, but they don't have any opportunities for you. So that's why we're paying this. So now now it comes down to the supply and the demand of the market, right? Where it's like, hey, well, yeah, they may be paying 80 grand and we're only going to be paying you 72. And if there is no opportunity, then they can do that.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So then the question is just like, well, do I value my time at that? And it's an interesting market too, because we're at a place right now where, we're a pretty tight labor market, I think. But the cost of living is so high that it's almost kind of like the laborer is a little bit handcuffed in their ability to even be able to say, no, if you're not going to pay me a fair competitive wage, regardless of the other opportunities that are out there, it's not like it's easy to walk away from that, because you need to make something, right? Because of it's not like the cost of living was modestly cheaper like it was even 10 years ago, where like you might have been able to weather a few additional months. Like now you're just kind of like, I kind of just need to.
Well, not only that, but like a lot of employers will fire anyone who even appears to be like available to accept offers from other jobs. Like if you put on your LinkedIn profile anything that suggests that, I'd be open
especially
to
if you're a higher earner within the company. Yeah. Especially when they think that they can get somebody else for cheaper. Like it's almost like they've created this environment where you almost don't want to get paid too much. Right. And that's just me kind of like speculating. It could not be the broader thing, but just a few conversations that I've had. It's just kind of like almost just like, well, you get to a point where it's like, if you're getting paid too much, like, is that an opportunity reason? Cost of job security?
Interesting.
You know what I mean? Or if you're approaching your pension age, like, you see, which I think is crazy. I think it's kind of like, you're in right to work states, but if you're approaching your pension, or if you've been with a company for so long and you've got a pension and you're like, and they fire you, like I just feel like there needs to be a very good reason, right? Like documented reason that you showed that you gave them opportunities to address the problems, concerns, and there was this plan.
Like if in other words, they get fired before they qualify for their pension.
Yeah, if they're like 2 years before their pension, or I would even say like 5 years, right? Yeah. Just like if they've invested a significant amount of time within the company with the expectation,
the vesting period should probably be shorter.
Yes, so you can't just fire them on a right to work and then deny them the pension. Because they weren't invested in it. I think that's a problem.
This is why I do feel like if it's done right, I think that a union system could work. The challenge with union systems is that they tend to be corrupted easily. So they themselves need some kind of a regulatory body in place. And I think we touched on this.
We talked a little bit about the benefits of.
Well, no, I'm just saying like
challenges of unions.
Yeah, if there was like an arbiter system, right, where like an arbitration system, where for that an employer and a union, because the problem is you go to the court system, it
takes forever.
Yeah, and it's highly costly or whatever. But if there's like an arbitration system where if an employer feels like the union is taking advantage or vice versa, then they can go, if they can't negotiate something through mediation, they go to arbitration, and the arbiter is the one who ultimately makes the decision on how that's going to play out. And hopefully the goal of that is that you have a neutral party that's there to ensure that the union is not taking advantage of their position, and that the business is not taking advantage of their position.
Yeah.
And then that some reasonable agreement is made or is instituted based on the arbiter's rule, based on the information that was presented to them. Right. I feel like that would probably be a pretty decent system. We already have an arbitration system that exists now. Yeah. So it wouldn't be much else to add to that. And then we're already familiar with the idea of unions. The big issue with unions is are they going to be ultimately corrupted? And I feel like the arbitration system would help at least alleviate corruption. It's not going to. There's nothing that you can prevent corruption from happening.
Yeah.
But at least a good union system would allow that. And then I would remove all like minimum wage requirements, because now the unions are going to be dictating what the minimum wage is for each industry or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So and then that also that leaves it open. Like maybe there's some, if you have like a startup business and you don't have more than 3 employees or something like that, you're not required to follow, any union wage requirements or something, like something small. Like if you're just getting started, like maybe you don't have to meet those requirements under that criteria. Or if it's a job that is super part-time and doesn't require a lot of skills, like a bag boy out of Publix or something like that, maybe they don't have a union, right? So they can get paid some, penance of a, right, something like that. So there's some liberties as it relates to how they would ultimately manage that.
I still think I go back and forth between minimum wage, but I do still think that minimum wage is a good thing to still have on the books. I think that, in my opinion, minimum wage needs to be tied to cost of living standards in local places.
But that's too hard to who's that? I think the problem with that is that who is going to be, that's the government now. You're going to have to create a whole department that's going to have to be like tied into each local area to identify what that minimum wage is, and then to be able to enforce that at
it could just be very it could just be metropolitan area. Like it could be like you could divide it just into 4 districts, right? Even if you did it just by state.
Mm-hmm.
Because
that's not good either. You go to California, where it costs to live in LA is substantially different than where it costs to live out in the rural areas. Like the difference is unreasonably different.
Well, maybe it's tied to the highest cost of living metropolitan area in that state, right? Which would allow the people who live in that metropolitan area to keep pace with the cost of living, and it would also promote those people to move out of that area into lower cost of living areas in order to have a higher purchasing power and let their dollar go further. So that's not something we're making a decision with here, like on the table, right? But I think that having something like that is good to have, because I feel that it is an easy way to measure the floor of. I think it's important to have a floor on wages. And if the union system comes in, right, then it really kind of becomes a moot point, right? Because you don't really need to do it. But I feel like it just gives us that. It just gives you that it gives you that floor, right? So when you're
without anything, yes, in lieu of what we have now, that would make sense. If you have a union system and the union is essentially establishing what the wage should be.
But that would be assuming that you have a union, either an all-encompassing union that covers any and all jobs, or you have an adequate amount of the individual unions to where all jobs are covered.
That's how they do it in, I can't remember if it's Sweden or Switzerland. So their system is very much industry specific and then even role specific. So like they have like a waiters union, but that's different than the line cooks union. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, that's because their wages are. Well, and I'm wondering what they get paid on waiters. So that's another big thing. That's another topic of conversation we talk about is the tip culture that we've had in this country, which has been exacerbated over the last few years.
Yeah.
Created a lot of tip fatigue. So much tip fatigue. My finger hurts from pressing the button.
So yeah, I mean that's obviously a good conversation to have, but yeah, let's we should totally
I know we
get
both
back
can
into it.
Back in.
Do you have an idea of we have a guest potentially coming next week?
Yeah, I can. I mean, maybe I'll even ask him what he's been seeing and see kind of like where
topics he wants
topics that he thinks that he wants to kind of talk about,
touch on.
And we can go from there. I feel like we kind of circle around a lot back to some stuff.
Well, I mean, we
do a lot of circular.
Well, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. I think that's the problem. The challenge is like there's a lot of conversation about what's happening with tariffs, what's happening with taxes, what's happening with the economy, right? So, and I feel it's a lot to unravel, and and I feel like these are important topics to kind of at least get some more clarity on as much as possible. Because I mean, I see so much on the news, and it's hard to discern like first of all, it's hard to discern like without doing any investigation. When people talk on the news, it's hard to discern like, are they just giving their opinion, or is this actual like journalism that they're doing? Because I find that a lot of times it's just their opinion. They're making claims and like this is just their opinion. They actually not done any real. They've done some headline work, right, where they've looked at a few headlines, and then now they're just they're making an opinion on a thing, but they haven't actually done any real journalism to investigate what's going on and what's happening, right, to report what is actually going on. And that's frustrating because they're doing that as if it's news. You know what I mean? And that's aggravating to me. And that's one of the reasons why I find like I look at different news outlets and, you know, they're both talking about the same thing and they're completely contradictory, like opinions on it, right? They're making it seem like it's news. And there's like two different news reels, two different headlines that are happening, right? And you're like, well, they can't be both right? Right? Like what's happening here? And when you do some homework and you kind of read into what they're doing and find out what's going on, you're like, oh, these are just their opinions on it. They're taking a left-wing position or a right-wing position or whatever, and it's not necessarily what the truth is. And that's like trying to get to like, and that's what all the muck is that we're doing. We're talking about like, okay, well, if you move, you know, you got to kind of dig through a lot of the muck to kind of get through the nuance, which, you know, it's hard for people to
do that.
Yeah,
it's hard for me to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we got jobs and life and
I know
junk.
Other things.
Yeah. Sure. So we painfully go through these conversations during this hour to hour and a half, so that hopefully you guys will enjoy and be able to give some feedback on some of this stuff.
That'd be great.
And try to figure this out. But anyways, if you guys like what you're watching, please share. Do me a favor. I would love to hear any of your thoughts on any of the topics that we're having conversations about. So please do me a favor and just comment below if you agree or disagree, if you have any thoughts on it, or if there's any topics that you guys want us to kind of chat about. We're happy to have a conversation about anything that sounds remotely interesting. So, so we appreciate you guys, and we'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.
Peace.